panel will be exploring the most pressing topics of the moment that influence all of our work collectively. Our speakers will share their insights and experiences, shedding light on whether now is the time to be bold or cautious in the world of life sciences and venture capital. I'd now like to introduce onto the stage my co-founder and our host for this morning, Nick Ross, to kickstart the conversation, and our panelists, Ksenija Pavletic, Chief Commercial Officer and Operational Investor at JEITO Capital, Charles Conn, co-founding partner at Monograph Capital, Clara Moya, managing partner and co-founder at Asabys Partners, and Laurence Barker, partner at the Dementia Discovery Fund managed by SB Health Investors. Welcome all. Thank you.
Great, thanks for joining us. So I think when we set about making this panel, thinking about the lens of the people in the room and the challenges that we're facing as an industry as a whole, I wanted to bring together individuals that are seeing it firsthand, conversations that they're having with these, the discussions that are really causing pressure at a time like this. And also, I think something that I'm hoping that everyone will agree with, though challenging, it's full of opportunity. And I think my first question to the panel, and Charles, if you'd like to start, really centres on what's the sentiment you're feeling from the LPs at the moment? What's the discussions you're having and how are they looking towards 2024?
Yeah, well, I think we all know the kind of macro, which is people are nervous. And I think we don't need to spend a lot of time on denominator effects and cash effects, right? That's affecting LPs. I think public markets going up and down means I don't think the denominator effect is going to be the big issue, but many people haven't been getting cash distributions, so they're feeling tight. That said, I think this is probably the best time to deploy capital that we've seen in, 15 or 20 years. And we feel like we're seeing kind of recognition of that and firmness in the market. So I don't think everyone's hiding under the beds, despite the fact that it feels a bit tough out there.
Ksenija, would that be something you agree with?
Definitely.
Yeah.
No, definitely. I fully agree. And definitely they're cautious. And they are under pressure, and they put us under pressure. But what I want to say is that our LPs, they do have a long-term vision. So as a GP, you're actually paid to do the right decision, whether it's exuberant time or whether it's depressive time. So, irrespective of economic reality that we are all facing, we still are paid to do our job well, and that means deploy the capital, but without necessarily being completely driven by the external market, because we are in a healthcare, and it is a long-term project.
Or is that similar to you?
So exactly the same. Perhaps we need to be now more than ever super proactive in communication and modeling this communication depending on the LP. So we do have lots of retail LPs, so family offices or wealthy individuals. And in these particular cases, they want you to anticipate. If you have we have a couple of companies in Israel, so you need to be very proactive. What's happening? How are we managing the situation? How are things going? That's different from the information that you were referring to regarding the markets or DPI or many other things. So I think that it really depends on the type of LP, and you need to be, again, super proactive and to adapt it. So how are our companies cash-wise? How are we managing cash situations? How will valuations for the next financial rounds on our portfolio companies influence? So you need to be anticipated it a little bit just to, and sometimes remind them that this is a long-term investment.
Laurence, your fund is probably unique in comparison to the others. And to Clara's point, are there certain pieces that you're communicating on uniquely, or elements that have changed over the last 2-3 years in terms of their key indicators? What are they looking for? What assurance do they need?
Yeah, thank you. Is that on? No? Trading. Thank you. Yeah, we are a little unique, and so my position would be bullish than perhaps some of my colleagues.
for a couple of reasons. We are a sector-focused fund, so Dementia Discovery Fund is the franchise I focus on, and I think there is more optimism now than there has ever been, and I probably to this audience don't need to explain myself when I say that. And so we have long-term aligned, impact-oriented LPs in particular, not all. We have a lot of family offices, but fundamentally they're very keen on the underlying asset and space we're in, and they see huge optimism. Obviously, the fundamentals of what we do aligns completely with the comments of my colleagues. But I think, the kind of discussions we have, what we report on, is all about the progress to novel drugs, novel treatments in the space. And that is driving the overarching optimism. So we see that both in terms of our LP conversations, annual general meeting beginning of the week, and that was certainly the strong feedback we were getting. And that's really driving, I think, our behavior and what we think we can now do. And so that's both benefiting from the market chaos, to use the phrase you guys have described it, but it is also the long-term excitement about the space we're in and the optimism.
Charles, Ksenija, in terms of those communication points, are you seeing anything different? Are you seeing any other indicators that, particularly compared to 2020 to 22 and 23, is there anything unique in terms of the requests they're asking for? Anything that's changed in terms of top of their list and agenda?
I mean, they do ask actually a long-term projections. How are we manage the reserves in the fund with the companies that we see? We all know that, IPOs are what they are. So this is kind of off the table for a while. So they really want to make sure that we manage the reserves well to be able to maintain our stake in the companies that are going to do well or are doing well, and preserving, the positions there, because we are building value, and building value means deploy more capital. So these are kind of very much the conversational points that we have with our LPs. But again, we are not in a cyclical business. We are really, in a long-term business. So you have to give yourself the time. And actually, this is why you really have to have a big fund that allows you actually to sail through these kind of situations, and not either reduce your positions in a good companies, or just be forced to do, very short-term strategies.
Yeah, I guess I've noticed three things that are maybe feel different. One is we get compliments on the discipline around our investment process, which seems like a funny thing to say. LPs are much more interested than in the past in the nitty-gritty of each of the businesses that we're looking at. So they want to know what the operating metrics are. Where are we with therapeutics? Obviously, where are we with the discovery process? And at least in our case, because we have a balance between therapeutics investing and pharma services and healthcare services investing, a lot of interest in P&L businesses that have more near-term ability to generate cash. So yeah, communication feels different, but mostly good. I mean, those are things we should be paying attention to, really.
Good, and some of this balance of maximising opportunity and taking advantage of what's currently going on, how are you thinking about that in terms of deploying capital and operating with discipline? Have things significantly changed in your processes internally from 2020, 2021, where you needed to sprint to catch good deals? Are you operating very differently? Have you set changes to processes internally in order to manage effectively over the coming years?
So for us, that we just launched our second fund less than a year ago. So most of the things are business as always, but again, as Charles was saying, we are getting invited to some deals and syndicates where probably we will not be there if that was not the current situation. It's a privilege to have a fresh fund up and running at this point. And then there are some things that are, as always, so since we can do very early stage investments and even company creation, we try to do that as soon as possible. So the trend now for some vehicles, which is be cautious and then just go for very late clinical stage things that are less risky, if you want. That's a little bit question mark also, but then just at the end, just go for very early stage and then decide on the road what you will be doing. So that's a little bit natural on us. So we are at the very beginning of the investment period. So we are doing the earliest, the better at this point, and opportunistically later stage things. So, but we are having these questions. So how things will be going if you are investing in a technology platform? How will you exit it if IPO might not be an opportunity in 3, 4, 5 years from now, or if it is at a certain point, the risk of that happening again is there, and everybody has it. So I think that creating optionalities from the very beginning, which was already in all of our DNAs, needs to be now more than ever something that you have to do, and also management teams need to be super open to anything of that. We will be seeing, we do invest in medtech and digital also. So particularly in some of these data-driven medtech companies, we are seeing a lot of consolidation, and you might be deciding whether you have a company that is able to be the consolidator or needs to be consolidated. So, we need to be very realistic in that sense too. So I think we need to be a bit more rigorous than ever, if anything.
We benefit from the fresh fund as well, and that drives really nice opportunity. But I think our strategy has been to, by and large, invest early, really to push the boundaries on novel science. I think the big shift for us is, as we do our new co-creations now, yes, you can benefit from attractive valuations, but at the same time, we don't get the step-ups we would have previously got early on. So there's two things we're shifting to. One is building much stronger earlier stage syndicates, so you can go that much further. I think in our field, you've got to build much stronger data packages to drive a reason to believe. And yes, we've had some really nice fundraisings recently, but again, probably for many people, you don't get the valuations. You're not being paid for that early risk and the extra work, you roll up your sleeves and build these companies. So we're trying to do that much more strongly earlier on than we have done, let's say, back in 2019, 2020 in particular, where we might have gone much deeper just as a single investor in something. We can't afford to do that now. So there's a much, we're trying to build things much earlier, much more strongly, so that we do actually get to data, give us some sense and value there. And I think that's quite a shift. So it's not a process shift, but definitely a strategy shift for us.
Very similar, and I must say that actually it requires you as a fund to work very, very closely with the management teams of your companies, and actually what you would maybe a few years ago do on a kind of, typical where we sit on these boards every 3 months and we talk. Here you are actually rolling up your sleeves and working with management teams to build this optionality early on. Actually, early investments today, even for a very preclinical asset, you already, before you decide to go in, you discuss pricing, you discuss market access, and I don't mean it in everyone does it, of course, you just read, but this means really who's gonna prescribe it, which is the patient, who's going to pay for it? How different is this asset versus what's going to be there in times? And how will you attract eventually an M&A or whatever? So it requires from us actually the operational experience. Okay, in JEITO we do have actually, it's our modus operandi. We are all actually previous entrepreneurs, so we know what it means. But it's a lot of work hand in hand with our portfolio companies to actually build this optionality.
Thinking about Charles, I wonder how you're approaching this requirement to be more hands-on, greater time investment, greater time resource, and yet being often, I think, as it stands within the funds, not actively recruiting in terms of team members. How are you managing that internally?
Yeah, and maybe we're similar, but we're doing fewer investments with more money in each investment. So instead of thinking about 15 investments in a fund, thinking about 10 investments in a fund. And I think this is very consistent with the previous comments, looking for investments where you can smell the value inflection rather than worried about particular stage. I mean, we're seeing companies, again, that we saw 3 years ago and passed on for the same price with 3 more years of data, right? So where is the real value inflection? And are you close enough to that? And passing on things that we think are great, but we don't think we're going to see that point soon. There is a huge issue with allocation of partner time. And that's, I think it's really important to keep the number of commitments to ones that you think you can actually be involved in value inflection.
If I may jump here, we are also working more and more with operating partners, so people that share our own culture and have been entrepreneurs or people from the industry, just to avoid being there only 3 times a month. One time every 3 months, and just having someone really close to the management team. So this is a way of doing that. We are 4 partners in a team of 10 people, quite dimensioned because we are super hands-on. It was like that in our first fund, 120 million euros, and now we are still fundraising second fund, but we just enlarged the team a little bit because we really need hands and heads to be on top of our companies to help them. It's not about asking questions all the time. It's about how can we help you? How can we just accelerate things?
Just to double down on that, we've had an explicit strategy in all of our company building right across, and whether I'm talking Dementia Discovery Fund or SME more broadly, that one of our deep venture partners, EIRs, leads the way on anything and stays with it, certainly through the first seed raise, sometimes beyond that. We've got a couple now, Series B companies, where they've actually decided they didn't want to come back and join us for the next one, but stay. Although many of them are repeat offenders when they've exited and come back. But I think that model for me, in terms of scaling the team and bringing, in our case, not just deep operating experience, but deep neuro drug discovery experience to the party's been really quite key to get these companies away effectively. Because board meetings every 4 weeks doesn't always work for a small investment team, clearly.
Good. Something to note, diversification is a sort of common theme to risk mitigation. And it seems like you're all going in the opposite direction. You're doubling down on businesses, you're being more aggressive, more ambitious, investing less in terms of number of companies, but putting more into those businesses. Is that fair to say across the panel?
But yeah, I would say yes.
Yeah, although diversification comes in different shapes and sizes, right? I mean, yes, but within companies, so I'll give you our specific lens on that. There's diversification by stage, by indication areas, by technologies. There's such a matrix you can play. So yes, I agree. From a company perspective, we also, our strategy as we shift from fund is to do fewer investments and go deeper and be stronger supporters. But I still think we're getting diversification in different ways, which is clearly crucial.
And have any of the other funds that you're working with, have you had similar approaches? Have you looked at other areas within biotech, life sciences as an attempt to maintain this mentality, or have you doubled down in certain sectors and avoiding others as a sense?
Well, I mean, I think what Laurence said is exactly right, which is, we have not tripled down, say, in oncology. We've tried to spread some of that risk across immunology and other areas. But for us, it's also been about paying attention to what we think of as kind of the first derivative of therapeutics investing, which is investing in digitally enabled pharma services and, to a slightly lesser extent, healthcare services. Those are great businesses that depend on the same kind of innovation engine as therapeutics, but are not binary. And they also have, operating business characteristics where there's a P sometimes as well as an L. And we like to have a mix of those kind of businesses as one way of moderating the risk of a therapeutics-heavy portfolio.
So we touched earlier on communication to LPs, and there's been certain indicators that, as an industry, LPs have moved away from biotech from an industry perspective. There have been European funds that their LPs have backed out of from an ESG point of view. And we've also seen in public markets positive clinical data not translate into positive growth in share price. I want to talk about impact and how we're communicating impact, and whether, as the VC sort of asset class, do we have a responsibility to change the way we communicate and to increase the way we're putting ourselves out to the public and generating greater interest? Are there any thoughts, any approaches that your organisations are taking to communication and impact and that's influencing the way you're operating day to day?
It's a lot education. it's really, sometimes we really need to educate our LPs what our business is about. We are not into, our assets are not tangible until they are at the very end when they become registered product, etc. Until then, it's a project, so it's a science, it's a therapeutic. So sometimes it's very difficult for them, to consider when does the risk become non-binary and maybe it's related only to the pure execution. Then they relax because then, okay, fine, you should be able to manage that. But I think for us, it's really what we see, it's a lot of educational effort and staying very close to them. And sometimes even, use a very basic example. For example, we had to, explain to our LPs what does the gene therapy in ophthalmology means. And then, we went to a point where we hired a graphist to show what a blind person or semi-blind person sees and what the person should see if our therapeutic we're developing is going to be. And you put these pictures next to each other, and then suddenly they realize, oh, but that's something, really impactful. But even though they know it's impactful, until you kind of make it crystal clear for them, because they invest in, many other things, especially pension funds, for example. So I would say it's staying very close and actually educating them on what our business is.
I think this is a key point because depending on the LPs, LPs that invest in our segment are looking for three things, return, and impact, So the message needs to be modulated because we are always giving the message of the impact, even if we have in front of us the CFO of an institutional private. Even if they don't care, we explain that because at a certain point within their institution, someone will care about it. And the fact that we are investing in this segment and not in many others, which are super licit but doesn't have the same impact. And everybody seems to have forgotten about some of the things we had 3 years ago. But then it's about also explaining the returns, also to those ones that sometimes just come for the impact part of it, right? So I think that we need to be super consistent and repetitive and open and not be tired to repeat that again and repeat that again. And I think that at the end of the day, that has given I think that our industry is very well positioned if you take zoom out view and perhaps what we were saying the last 3 years was the exception, not the other way around. So,
yeah, from my perspective, we don't do a good job in communicating impact. I think I'd say a terrible job. I know there's a lot of initiatives out there to try and align on how we do this as a venture, from my perspective, a venture sector, and that's key. The feedback we get from a bunch of LPs is they don't actually know what they want. Other than the obvious, right? They don't know what they want reported on. We don't get pushback from portfolio companies collecting data. In fact, they're very keen. They're keen to learn themselves about what people want. But I think we have to drive it. We have to come together and drive it. And education is key. And then communicate there. We've been doing this now 1.5 to 2 years, being very proactive about collecting data. We're just about to issue a report on that across SV. But this is in dialogue with key LPs as they learn what they need to report on themselves. Because I think, effectively made the point, classic ESG is, it's not been this type of healthcare focus. And so as we learn and argue, and I think we can all argue that very strongly, that this is impact, but we've got to be able to educate and align those components to it. You go to an impact conference, you go to the GIN conference, right? Healthcare is effectively not discussed at all. It's like, well, come on, guys, that's just not appropriate for where we are now in terms of what we're trying to achieve. So I think we've got to do a better job here. And we're getting there, but we're not there at all.
Yeah, so when you are fundraising, sometimes if you mention impact, someone asks for LPs that are new, do you do climate change things also? And no, not exactly. So, but I think that's, again, we need to repeat and repeat and repeat it again 1,000 times as much as needed. So.
Yeah, to me, it's amazing how bad we are at storytelling. That this is what it's about. We're actually at we'll look back and say this was the golden era of biotech. and we're not telling that story. We actually have cures. I mean, there's potential cure for frontal temporal dementia. Imagine with gene therapies, we could actually fix people. Are we telling that story? I don't think so. We have good jobs. We have relatively clean supply chains. We're not telling the story. But, my nighttime gig is chairing Patagonia. They know how to tell a story, right? We're not doing that. We're not doing a good job of it.
There was a question I asked the panel last year. I won't tell you what they said until you've answered. But would your LPs accept lower returns in exchange for greater impact?
There are some that yes, and some of them just explain that to you. So if at a certain point we were now telling them, okay, we are going to change the strategy to keep the returns we were pitching to you some years ago, but we will be investing in other things which are just incremental innovation and not disruptive science. I believe that most of them will not accept that. Definitely.
Yeah, I completely agree. We have some sort of LPs out on the extreme who want to just see impact, but most of the capital we have wants to see absolutely both. They do. The sector we're in, the market opportunity, the scale of the problem, they want both. And I think even if we were willing to accept low returns, then we wouldn't be able to fundraise in the future because we want to attract a much broader base of capital to be successful long term. Yeah. And we won't stand up against other ventures.
And don't get me wrong, I mean, our pitch and our way of thinking is that only the disruptive science will give us the promised returns. So it probably not be one or the other. It's just that the only way to have the big returns is diversification in the portfolio, knowing that some things will not work, and going really for disruptive solutions.
I don't buy the binary. I mean, we often do this, and maybe we do this in something like clothing manufacture where there really are hardcore trade-offs. In our world, impact is where the returns are. And I think they come together. In many industries, you say they come together over the long term, but we live in the short term. In this industry, I think we get paid for innovation relatively quickly.
For us, for example, it all starts fundamentally by patient and the patient benefit, because you can't dissociate the financial return from the patient benefit. It's just so, our LPs, that's how we start our pitch, actually. Patient is at the core of all our investment decisions. And then the financial returns are driven by the benefits that we ultimately provide at the very end to the patients.
Brilliant. Last year it was short and sweet, their answers, and it was no. So maybe that's a sign that optimism is growing.
Looking forward to next year.
Good. As the headhunter in the room, I'd be remiss not to ask this question, but has the hires you made in 2020 and 2021 within your organisations, has the culture changed, has the environment changed, have the quality of your hires impacted the quality of your work now? Are you thinking about processes that you've gone through bringing people on board?
I don't know. Okay, I always thought. No. Okay, we are a relatively young fund, so it's JEITO. So we just started. Actually, we raised just in the middle of COVID, so during the lockdown. So in reality, for us, it immediately started really, really hard. Really, the bar very high. But like I said, our approach is really, we fundamentally believe that unless you've been in the industry, on the operating side, entrepreneur and big pharma, it's very, very difficult to truly appreciate the time, the effort, and the money it's going to take to really build that value. So we, from day one, started to look for people who have been in industry, and they can bring experience, be it from IP, being from CMC manufacturing. Usually it's always forgotten, until very too late, when you realize you have to deploy, huge amount of capital to sort that out. On the regulatory, on clinical development, acceleration, it's one of the key things. The minute we go into the company, we want to start working with the management team. How can we be smart in clinical development? How can we accelerate it? How can we extend the indications? Everybody knows that previous strategy, going short, very limited indication, expand later on, it's question mark now. So all of these things is actually driving what kind of people we are hiring into the fund, because they can actually then help our portfolio companies to grow the value and get better in the execution.
Just two comments. Back to the one I made before. For our very young companies where we're doing company build, we don't try and hire in top CEOs, CMOs at that stage. We do drive those companies with venture partners initially to build greater reason to believe, so you can attract top talent. I think the one shift for us, and this is probably applies to many, is we've become much more open-minded about geography, location of senior people. Given we all sort of operated via Zoom, etc., during lockdown. And so for a bunch of companies now, we've not insisted on the right person being located full-time with the youngish team. And that's been a shift, certainly, that I've noticed across our portfolio. And brings other problems, I admit, but I think to get the right person in the right job, that's been the primary driver of hire.
So at the GP level, no, we have not changed our strategy. And the fact that we launched a second fund and did the first closing of 100 million helped in not changing that strategy, because at the end of the day, you have your own economics at the GP level. So we started 5 years ago, in autumn 2018, with 6 people, 2 managing partners, 6 people total team. Now we are 10, about to be 11 in a couple of weeks, with 2 managing partners, 2 partners, and the rest of the team. So no, we need to be ambitious in that setting, and particularly with the current trends also at the GP levels, consolidation, non-consolidation, and these kind of things. I think that we need to just push hard and push forward and deploy and do our homework correctly. So no, it has not changed. I think it would have given us a sign of debility probably, or lack of consistency.
Good. So I wanted to move the conversation a bit, a gear shift into, and it's not UK, Europe versus US, but the comparator between the two. And we've seen a number of US firms open offices in Europe and the UK. We've seen US investment double, if not triple, over recent years within our space. Is this an indicator, and playing slightly argumentative here, that we're missing out on opportunities, that we're not playing rhythm, that we are letting good things pass?
Of course it is. Of course it is. Why do you think they're setting up here? And you can hear I have a funny accent too. It's sort of, I'm trying to behave myself. It's ridiculous. We're sitting here, on the edge of the city of London, where there's enormous pools, worldwide pools of insurance and pension capital and government capital, which we are not deploying into the innovation sectors, the risk sectors of the economy, particularly here when we speak European, but when we speak just of UK, we've done this enormous self-harm with Brexit, and then we've doubled down by not actually making the changes that are required to free capital to go into the risk sectors of the economy. And there have been moves toward it. You've seen this recent initiative around getting pension money in, but then you've also seen these absolutely ridiculous debates in places like the FT saying venture capital is too risky for pensions. Like they haven't read 70 years of portfolio theory, right? And our friends in Canada and Australia, which are, by the way, much smaller places that have much less sophisticated financial sectors, are onto it. And they're setting up here. So shame on us, really. Sorry.
Yeah, I can't agree more. No, it's definitely. And what is also frustrating is that when you look the amount of science actually there is, and quality of science there is in Europe, and simply you do not have. And the companies, when they're, let's say, early stage and risky, more risky than when they're late stage, then they can actually get access to the European capital. But then when this is de-risked, and actually they need more capital because they're successful, they go to the US because they can't raise money here for the benefit of US funds, while we took all the risk. So it's I fully agree. So there is absolutely a need to have a lot more understanding and capital. And there is capital. I mean, European pension funds, I just came from a meeting in France, and there is like, in Paris, the Ministry of Economy, they have 50 billion capital to deploy. But again, they have to really understand that this is not gambling type of industry where either you're lucky or you are unlucky. It is a hardcore work and process that ultimately gets you to really interesting returns.
Maybe an anecdote just from us, which sadly just follows this trend. So even on the LP side, in our first fund, we had about 50% of the capital committed was UK, Europe. For the second fund, at the moment, we're almost late 80s out the US, right? So it's just absolutely plummeted here, or flipped around. The US capital sees the opportunity and it's just increased hugely. And I'm sure our portfolio reflects all the last 3-4 substantial rounds I've seen, 2/3 at least, if not more, of the capitals come from elsewhere.
I was in a conference in September, and there was Dr. Mariano Barbacid. I don't know if you know him. The conference was in Barcelona. He's an quite senior academic person coming from the academia. He worked for a while in the industry. He's Spanish and he lived in the US, but then he went back to Spain, and he's an academic there at the CNIO. So he was in a conference and in a panel like this one, and someone asked him, what do you see Europe versus the US? And he said, 30 years ago, 2/3 of the drugs that were put in the market were invented and developed in Europe, while now it's less than 1/3. And we all got shocked. I mean, I've not been able to double check the data, to be honest, but I think that was quite provocative on his side. And when they asked him, why do you think is that? He said, oh, it's super clear. It's just the amount of venture capital being in one side and the other of the Atlantic. And I was shocked. I started retweeting the whole thing. I mean, 1,000 times, of course. But I think that that's obvious for people that is even outside the VC world. So I think that mobilizing this capital is a must. Of course, we need to think about global markets. Of course, we don't care whether the funds come from one side or the other. But I think that we need to be very loud and clear in saying what you just said, Charles. I think that's important.
To that point of thinking on where finance is coming from in Europe, we've got good European and UK backing in terms of governments putting money into systems, but often with a host of strings attached. Do you think that's limiting our ability to build large-scale organisations? Do you think we operate with, again, argumentatively, that we've got a bit of a small mindset and a localised mindset? And I think some of the funds that I've worked with in the past, financing of their LPs are often very local. Do you think we should be operating with a more UK-European mindset and actually delivering capital more freely and not putting the same constraints on or being more opportunistic? We direct that at Charles, considering he's optimism.
Yes. When you look at the rules that have been put in place around the allocation of government money into our sector, they are ridiculous. I mean, can you imagine you're coming to a fund where you represent 5% or 10% of the capital, but then you impose a rule about how much local content there's going to be from that, rather than looking ex post and saying that's the kind of fund that's doing good stuff in country. You try and establish rules and audit points ex ante, which doesn't make any sense at all. You're trying to dictate to the rest of the capital stack exactly how this money's invested rather than being invested in the best things. So this is the kind of thing where you're just tying both hands behind your back and then trying to operate. That doesn't make any sense. And when you look here at how pension funds compete with each other, just to take another example, they're competing based on fees, not based on returns, but with an aging population. I mean, this is the kind of thing that a small amount of government policy and a small amount of education could address. And when you add to that, then how the aim and how the larger public markets here work, we really are in a disadvantaged situation relative to global capital. We need to be global capital. We need to think like global capital. And we need to recognize what you said a moment ago, which is there's more quantity of good science in Europe compared to the United States. You can look at patents, you can look at, there's a bunch of different measures, papers, jury papers. We need to be more confident, and we need to be more confident in the rules upon which we allocate capital.
Do you think as a group, then as individuals, as people in this room, there are actions that we can take to influence the space, the industry, as a group, best to say, what should we be doing?
I think that again, communication and keep on giving the same consistent message. I think that we are all saying more or less the same, and probably the rest of the people here would agree in most of the things we've just discussed. I think that we are seeing now lots of US and other type of capital coming to Europe because valuations kept still quite reasonable, at least in our sector, and because we are much more efficient in the use of capital. And the talent is different, the loyalty of the talent is different in Europe than in the US, at least up to now. So I think that we need to be very clear on that. We are super focused on delivering. We are used to do that with not as much money as in other places of the world. We will need to keep in this model. But imagine if you were deploying much more amount of money into our sector where we could reach. And it's not, okay, then we will be just 20% of what's happening worldwide. It might not be even the opportunity. I mean, if it's a little bit binary also in that sense. So it's not that, okay, let's keep as we are. No, it might be that the sector then is not able to continue. So I think that's also important. And the message that foreign or other type of capital is landing here, I think is a good thing, but that should make other people react also.
I think, without being condescending, I think there's some education here, and I think you have to use data to do it. And we for a couple of our investors, we report different metrics for them to show impact on, let's call it, economic growth in the UK as a function of capital deployed. And back to the point raised, it's not just their capital that's driving that. Yeah. It's the catalyzation of all the other capital too. And you've got to show that. And that's back to your point about the history of the manager, how they operate, how they invest. You know, if they don't trust that we are, aligned in our interests there, then they make a different decision, fine. But I think there is data to support that, and we're certainly really trying to push that agenda heavily by just showing them the data and talking and discussing with them.
I think for us, it's also, I mean, I fully agree with everything you said. We also try to negotiate with our LPs, maybe a range in terms of allocation of capital rather than a cutoff. I mean, sometimes we succeed, sometimes we don't. But we try to show with an example, it would be crazy to miss an opportunity because you can't allocate. That would be completely counterproductive. So, and then you find a wiggle room, there is, suddenly an affiliate is created where it should be with a little bit of activity, so then you can...
You have no idea what you're talking about.
Exactly. So we have plenty of companies with, next to the railway station from Eurostar.
Perhaps when we've got a couple of minutes left, are there any questions from the audience at all? Please.
Hi, thank you very much. I really enjoyed the conversation. My name is Silvia Ragno, Chief Operating Officer from Asabys. We have talked a lot about disruptive science and innovation for you to invest. However, disruptive science comes with a level of risk taking. We are operating in the field of rare diseases, so obviously there is not very much done. The level of risk is quite high. So I really would like to have your opinion, because along the years I've seen the threshold really lower in terms of risk taking for investors. But again, we want to have disruptive science. So I wouldn't mind to hear your thoughts about this conundrum from you.
I can jump in if you want. So I think that it's not only about risk or not risk. It depends also on the size of the funds and how to manage. We are seeing lots of big funds, very big funds, which is a very nice thing to have. And particularly, I think Europe was missing, was lacking that, and now we have it. But at the end of the day, operationally, these funds need to deploy large tickets. So that needs to come at a certain stage of development or platform or whatever, because if not, it's just not doable. And you want to syndicate, not take all the risk on your own. So I think that the risk can be taken, but then you need the appropriate syndicate. There is not a common unique syndicate that is good for every company or every type of technology. I think it depends a lot. And you can even add other types of members of the syndicate, perhaps not as leading, but just to complement the capital to decrease a little bit the risk taking by the other type of VCs. So I think there are ways of doing that. I don't think the threshold of risk has decreased, but I think that the sector and the market is becoming super complex. So as you were saying before, I think that we need to make sure that that piece of innovation or technology will be well paid in the future, which means we'll have a real impact on patient outcomes at a certain point when it reaches the market. If not, no one is going to pay for that innovation. And I'm sorry, if you make the numbers back, this is what it is. So at the end of the day, the amount of risk needs to be balanced with the amount of impact, if you want, or benefit it can bring. If it's de-aligned, then of course risk, but that's not the only reason why perhaps funds are not making the decision not to invest in certain areas or in certain technologies. It's because also the potential return, it's not there to balance the risk. That's my opinion. But
if I may add, great company, by the way. For example, rare disease, before we invest, of course, we go in to get out at certain point. So the out, we don't invent it by ourselves. We talk to the pharmas, actually, who are eventually potentially a buyer. And that happened with rare diseases, that the threshold on the buyer side at the end, in terms of the size of a market that they would still consider a viable business, has gone up. And that kind of then does a domino effect on what we do and where we actually balance what you just said, the risk versus the return. So that's something that particularly happens in rare disease.
Maybe one comment, just because we haven't discussed pharma much this morning at all. We've had an explicit strategy in our space, and acknowledge we're quite focused and unique, to pull pharma much closer to us. If you will, providing we know where we're going and what they need to see, and that's particularly for early clinical development. Everyone knows that's been challenging in Alzheimer's, but many other areas too. And so we've had very explicit strategy, right from the beginning of setting out here. We have a bunch of LPs, farmers, yes, that's fine, but I don't just mean limited to that. I mean right across. People who are interested in neuro, we pull them very close. And that's been a way, it's another risk mitigation strategy. So you know where you're going, you know what you're doing, but also they want to often lean in, whether that's with capital, with BD combination, without capping upside, right, to the main thrust of the company. And by doing that, I think that is definitely, we see, and the feedback we get is very clearly a key component of a risk mitigation strategy.
Good. I think we've hit time, and there's a host of interesting points there from using operating partners to really mobilise and manage challenging times at the moment, the doubling down on businesses and considering diversity in terms of tools, technologies, and other areas that you're investing in. And good to see there's optimism about what comes next year. Maybe I'm a glass half full individual. It's a general philosophy. But thank you very much to the panelists. We have, and I'm pleased not to have received another umbrella or water bottle. We did make a donation to the Opie Jones Foundation, which I know Jason Foster's in the room and involved with, so do come and talk to us about it. It's a really interesting organisation and a great charity. Thank you all for coming, and thank you very much to our panelists.